Veltar pressed his long fingers against the observation deck's cool metal surface and watched the human ship grow larger on the viewing screen. The vessel looked strange to his eyes. Where Velnari ships curved and flowed like living things, this human craft was all sharp angles and straight lines. It reminded him of the geometric patterns his people used in their earliest mathematics lessons. Another primitive species, he muttered to himself in the clicking language of his people. They will probably destroy themselves within a few cycles. Veltar had seen this story before. Young civilizations always thought they were special. They always believed they could conquer the stars and bend the galaxy to their will. Most died trying. The lucky ones learned their place and became quiet members of the galactic community. The unlucky ones vanished into the dark spaces between stars. His ship, the research vessel Harmony's Edge, maintained a safe distance from the human craft. Veltar's job was simple: watch the humans, learn about them, decide if they were worth talking to. If they proved too dangerous or too stupid, the Velnari Confederation would simply avoid their space until they burned themselves out. Observer Veltar to the communication deck, came the announcement through the ship's speakers. The humans are requesting contact. Veltar sighed and made his way through the curved corridors of his ship. His 4 legs carried him quickly past other crew members who barely looked up from their work. Everyone knew this was routine. Another species wanted to join the galactic community. They would be tested, measured, and most likely found lacking. The communication deck buzzed with activity. Velnari technicians worked at their stations while holo displays showed detailed scans of the human vessel. Captain Morkan, an elderly Velnari with silver markings across his pale blue skin, nodded as Veltar entered. They have been broadcasting the same message for 3 standard hours, Captain Morkan explained. Simple mathematical sequences. Basic peaceful intentions. Nothing we have not heard 1,000 times before. What makes these humans different? Veltar asked, settling his large frame into an observation chair. Nothing yet. But they are persistent. Most species give up after an hour of no response. These humans keep trying. Veltar studied the scanning reports. The human ship was smaller than most vessels that attempted first contact. It carried minimal weapons and seemed built more for exploration than conquest. That was unusual. Most young species sent their largest warships to make first contact, trying to impress the galaxy with their strength. Allow communication, Captain Morkan ordered. The main screen flickered and showed the interior of the human ship. Veltar leaned forward with interest. The human who appeared on screen looked different from the few images they had gathered. This one was shorter than expected, with black hair and dark eyes. He wore what appeared to be a simple uniform without excessive decoration. "This is Captain Lee Daeho of the Earth vessel New Horizon," the human said in clear, precise galactic standard. "We come in peace seeking dialogue with the Velnari Confederation." Veltar blinked in surprise. The human spoke their trade language better than many established galactic species. Most newcomers struggled with the complex grammar and tonal requirements. This Captain Lee made it sound natural. "I am Captain Morkan of the Velnari ship Harmony's Edge," the Velnari captain replied. "State your intentions in this sector." "We wish to establish diplomatic relations between our peoples," Captain Lee answered. "We understand that first contact protocols require careful evaluation. We are prepared to answer any questions and provide any information you require." Veltar noticed something odd in the human's manner. Captain Lee showed no signs of the usual first contact nervousness. No sweating, no trembling voice, no desperate eagerness to impress. He seemed calm and confident, as if this conversation was exactly what he expected to happen. Behind Captain Lee, Veltar could see other humans moving about their ship. A female human with short black hair worked at what appeared to be a tactical station. Her movements were efficient and purposeful. Another human, also female, stood near what looked like scientific equipment. She glanced at the screen occasionally, but seemed more interested in her work than the historic first contact. "What can your species offer the galactic community?" Captain Morkan asked, following standard first contact procedures. "We offer trade, knowledge sharing, and mutual cooperation," Captain Lee replied. "We have advances in several fields including medical technology, agricultural techniques, and material science. More importantly, we offer friendship and alliance to all peaceful species." Veltar found himself leaning forward again. That answer was different. Most species led with their military strength or their resource wealth. They wanted to establish dominance or prove their value through what they could take or control. This human talked about cooperation as if it was the most natural thing in the galaxy. "What do you know of galactic politics?" Captain Morcon continued. "We understand that the galaxy can be dangerous," Captain Lee said. "We know there are species that prefer conquest to cooperation. We know that trust must be earned, and that peaceful intentions must be proven through actions, not just words." The female human at the tactical station looked up and said something quietly to Captain Lee. Veltar enhanced his audio pickup and caught her words. "Sir, they have 17 ships in scanning range, all maintaining safe distance and defensive positions." Captain Lee nodded slightly, but his expression did not change. "We also understand that caution is wisdom when meeting unknown species. We do not take offense at reasonable security measures." Veltar felt a strange sensation in his chest. This human had just demonstrated that they knew exactly how outnumbered they were, yet showed no fear or hostility. They accepted the Velnari caution as logical rather than insulting. That kind of emotional control was rare even among established galactic species. The conversation continued for another hour. Captain Lee answered every question directly and honestly. He provided technical specifications when asked, cultural information when requested, and even offered to submit to any testing the Velnari deemed necessary. What impressed Veltar most was what the humans did not do. They did not boast about their achievements. They did not make demands or threats. They did not try to rush the process or show impatience with Velnari procedures. They simply answered questions and waited. When the communication ended, Veltar found himself staring at the blank screen for several minutes. In his long career studying emerging species, he had never encountered anything quite like these humans. They seemed to understand galactic politics better than species who had been part of the community for centuries. "Interesting," Captain Morcon said quietly. "Very interesting," Veltar agreed. "I request permission to conduct extended observation." "Granted. Take a small ship and follow them at distance. Learn everything you can about these humans." As Veltar prepared for his new assignment, he could not shake the feeling that something important had just happened. These humans were different. Whether that difference would prove beneficial or dangerous remained to be seen. But for the first time in decades, Veltar felt genuinely curious about a species' potential. The human ship began moving away, heading back toward their home system. Veltar watched it go and wondered what secrets these strange, confident beings might be hiding. Soon he would find out. 3 months had passed since Veltar first encountered the humans. Now he found himself aboard their exploration ship, New Sol, watching their daily operations with growing confusion. These humans continued to surprise him in ways he had not expected. Captain Cho Minho ran his ship differently than any commander Veltar had observed. Where most species maintained strict hierarchies with clear divisions between ranks, the human captain encouraged his crew to speak freely. Junior officers offered suggestions to senior staff. Scientists debated with engineers. Everyone seemed to have opinions, and everyone seemed willing to share them. "Observer Veltar," called Chief Engineer Bei Hyunji from across the engine room. "Could you check these power readings? Your people have better mathematics than us." Veltar moved his forelegs carefully between the human-sized equipment. The engine room was cramped by his standards, but the humans had modified several areas to accommodate his larger frame. They did this without being asked, simply because it made sense to them. He examined the power readings on Bei's screen. The numbers looked correct to him, but he noticed something else. The human engineer was running the ship's power systems at 97% efficiency. Most species considered 80% acceptable performance. "Why do you push your engines so hard?" Veltar asked. Bei smiled, an expression Veltar had learned meant pleasure or satisfaction among humans. "Because we can make them better. Every day we find small improvements. Every improvement means we can go further, explore more, help more people." This was another human trait that puzzled Veltar. They never seemed satisfied with good enough. If something worked, they tried to make it work better. If it worked better, they tried to make it perfect. If it was perfect, they found new ways to use it. Dr. Yoon Tae-kyung demonstrated this tendency perfectly. The chief scientist spent his days studying everything from stellar formation to alien plant samples. But he did not just catalog his findings like most researchers. He looked for connections, patterns, and applications. "Look at this," Dr. Yoon said, showing Veltar a holographic display of crystalline structures. "These crystals from the Kepler system can store energy more efficiently than our current batteries. But if we modify their structure slightly, they could also purify water and generate heat." "One crystal with 3 functions," Veltar observed. "Exactly. Most species would use 3 different technologies. Humans prefer solutions that solve multiple problems at once." Veltar had been recording these observations for his monthly reports to the Velnari Confederation. His superiors found his descriptions interesting, but not particularly important. Humans seemed clever and resourceful, but many species possess those qualities. What made humans special remained unclear. The answer began to reveal itself during a routine supply mission to the outer colonies. The new soul approached a small mining station that had requested medical assistance. The station's population was mostly human, with a few Velnari families and some other species Veltar did not recognize. "Station. Commander reports an outbreak of Rigel fever," announced Communications Officer Park Jiwoo. 17 cases confirmed, more suspected. Captain Cho studied the medical reports. Rigel fever was not usually fatal, but it could cause permanent damage if not treated quickly. The problem was that the station's medical supplies were designed for humans. The other species aboard needed different treatments. Dr. Kim Sora, "Prepare medical teams for immediate deployment," Captain Cho ordered. "Sir," Dr. Kim replied, "our medical bay is not equipped for multi-species treatment. We have human medications and some basic Velnari supplies, but nothing for the other species." Veltar expected Captain Cho to make the logical decision: treat the humans and Velnari, then contact appropriate medical ships for the other species. It would take several days for help to arrive, but that was simply how things worked in space. You helped who you could and accepted that you could not help everyone. Captain Cho did something different. "Dr. Kim, work with Dr. Yoon to modify our medications for other species biology. Engineering, I want you to convert Cargo Bay 2 into a temporary medical facility. Communications, send messages to every ship within 3 days' travel. Ask for any medical supplies they can spare." "Sir," Dr. Kim said carefully, "modifying medications for unknown biology is extremely dangerous. We could kill them instead of helping them." "Then we test everything carefully," Captain Cho replied. "We run simulations, we start with small doses, we monitor constantly. But we do not leave people to suffer when we might be able to help them." Veltar watched the next 48 hours with amazement. The entire ship transformed into a medical rescue operation. Engineers built specialized equipment for species they had never treated before. Scientists worked around the clock analyzing alien biology and testing modified medicines. Even the ship's cook contributed by researching nutrition requirements for recovering patients. The most remarkable thing was that nobody complained. Nobody suggested that helping non-humans was not their responsibility. Nobody calculated the cost in time, resources, or risk to themselves. They simply worked as if saving everyone was the only acceptable outcome. Dr. Yoon approached Veltar during the second day of the crisis. The human scientist looked exhausted but determined. "I need to ask you about Velnari physiology," Dr. Yoon said. "The fever affects your people differently than humans. Can you help me understand how your immune system responds to treatment?" Veltar provided the information, but he also asked a question that had been troubling him. "Why are you doing this? The non-human population of that station is small. Most species would prioritize their own people." Dr. Yoon looked at him with surprise. "Because they need help and we can provide it." "Is there another reason needed?" That simple answer contained something profound that Veltar was only beginning to understand. For humans, the ability to help created the obligation to help. They did not calculate whether assistance was profitable or strategically advantageous. They did not consider whether the people needing help were important or valuable. They helped because help was needed and they could provide it. The medical mission succeeded. All 17 patients recovered completely. The new soul's modifications to standard medicines became part of galactic medical databases, helping future multi-species emergencies. Captain Cho received official thanks from 4 different planetary governments, but Veltar knew the humans had not acted for recognition or reward. They had acted because their nature demanded it. This realization disturbed him because it suggested that humans might be fundamentally different from every other species in the galaxy. His disturbing thoughts were interrupted when the ship's long-range sensors detected something that would change everything. A massive fleet was approaching from the edge of known space, moving at incredible speed toward both human and Velnari territory. The calm period was ending. Soon, Veltar would discover what humans were truly capable of when everything they cared about was threatened. The emergency meeting aboard the human command vessel brought together leaders from across human space. Veltar observed from a corner of the briefing room, his large frame hunched over a specially modified chair. The atmosphere was tense but controlled, very different from the panic he had witnessed in other species when faced with existential threats. Admiral Song Jae-min stood before a massive holographic display showing the approaching fleet. The ships were unlike anything in known galactic databases. They moved in perfect formation, thousands of vessels advancing like a dark wave across the star charts. Intelligence confirms these are the Keth Mori swarm, Admiral Song announced. Long-range scouts have been tracking their expansion for 6 months. They have consumed 17 star systems in the outer rim. Commander Lim Soo-jin activated additional displays showing devastated worlds. They strip planets completely. No survivors, no infrastructure left behind. They take everything useful and leave dead rocks floating in space. Veltar had heard rumors of the Keth Mori from other galactic species. They were described as a hive mind, a collective consciousness that viewed all other life as either resources to harvest or obstacles to destroy. Most civilizations that encountered them simply fled to safer regions of the galaxy. Intelligence Officer Ryu Da-hee presented the tactical analysis. Her voice remained steady despite the grim information she delivered. Enemy fleet consists of approximately 8,000 vessels of various sizes. Their technology appears focused on resource extraction and planetary consumption. Combat capabilities are unknown but presumed extensive. What about our defensive capabilities? Asked Captain Park Ji-hoon, commander of the human fleet's tactical operations. Combined human and Velnari forces total roughly 800 ships, Admiral Song replied. We are outnumbered 10 to 1. Veltar expected this information to create despair among the human leadership. Any rational species would begin planning evacuation procedures or surrender negotiations. The numbers made victory mathematically impossible. Instead, the humans began planning how to win. Dr. Oh Yunbi, what do we know about Keth Mori weaknesses? Admiral Song asked. The research scientist consulted her datapad. Limited information available. They appear to be a true hive mind, which suggests centralized command structures. Individual units may have reduced initiative when separated from the collective. However, this is largely speculation. Speculation is better than nothing, Admiral Song said. I want research teams working on every possible weakness. If they have limitations, we will find them and exploit them. Captain Park Ji-hoon studied the enemy formation on the tactical display. Their advance is methodical but predictable. They move as one massive unit rather than independent task forces. That could work against them in a fluid battle situation. Agreed, Admiral Song nodded. Commander Lim, I want our fastest ships conducting harassment raids along their flanks. Force them to react to multiple threats. Test their response times and coordination. Veltar listened to this planning session with growing amazement. The humans were not just refusing to accept defeat. They were actively looking for ways to achieve victory against impossible odds. They discussed strategies that required perfect timing, incredible luck, and sacrifices that other species would never consider acceptable. What about civilian evacuations? Asked Dr. Oh Yunbi. Negative, Admiral Song replied firmly. We evacuate no one until we know we cannot win. Every ship used for evacuation is one less ship defending our worlds. This decision shocked Veltar. The Velnari Confederation had already begun moving non-essential personnel away from border systems. It was standard procedure when facing superior forces. Protect what you could and accept the loss of what you could not save. Humans apparently did not accept such losses. The meeting continued for hours as human commanders developed increasingly desperate strategies. They planned coordinated attacks that required precise timing across multiple star systems. They designed weapon modifications that had never been tested in combat. They prepared boarding actions against ships that were likely defended by unknown alien technology. Most disturbing to Veltar was their casualty projections. Human planners calculated that they would lose 60 to 70% of their forces in the best-case scenario. In worse cases, the losses could reach 90%. Yet no one suggested these numbers made victory impossible. They simply planned how to make those sacrifices count for something. Observer Veltar, Admiral Song addressed him directly. Can we count on Velnari's support in this conflict? Veltar hesitated. His people had already decided to withdraw their ships to defensive positions around their core worlds. The Velnari Confederation would fight if directly attacked, but they would not sacrifice their forces in hopeless offensive operations. My government will defend Velnari space, Veltar replied carefully. However, they believe your planned offensive actions are too risky. Understood, Admiral Song said without showing disappointment. We appreciate any defensive cooperation you can provide. The human admiral did not criticize the Velnari decision or try to pressure Veltar into changing his government's position. He simply accepted the situation and continued planning with the resources available to him. After the meeting, Veltar found himself walking through the ship's corridors with Dr. Oh Yunbi. The human scientist was reviewing tactical data on her portable computer, still working despite the late hour. May I ask you something? Veltar said. Of course. Why do your people refuse to consider evacuation? You could save millions of lives by withdrawing to safer systems. Dr. O stopped walking and looked up at him. Her expression was serious but not angry. Because if we retreat, the Kethmori will follow. They will consume our abandoned worlds and grow stronger. Eventually they will catch up to wherever we run, and then we will face them with fewer ships and fewer resources. But you might survive to fight another day, Veltar pointed out. Survive to watch them destroy everything we built? Survive to see other species consumed while we hide in the dark corners of the galaxy? Dr. O shook her head. That is not survival. That is just a slower form of death. Her words contained something that Veltar was beginning to recognize as fundamentally human. They did not measure survival by the continuation of their existence alone. They measured it by the preservation of their values, their relationships, and their ability to protect others. The next morning brought news that changed everything. Commander Lim's reconnaissance ships had engaged the Kethmori advanced scouts. The enemy had responded exactly as human strategists predicted, revealing crucial information about their combat capabilities and coordination methods. But the cost had been high. 3 human ships were destroyed and 2 more badly damaged. 17 crew members were dead, 43 wounded. For most species, such losses during a minor skirmish would prompt immediate withdrawal. The humans began planning their next attack. Veltar realized that he was about to witness something unprecedented in galactic history. Not just a battle between species, but a fundamental test of different approaches to existence. The Kethmori represented pure consumption, taking everything for themselves. The Velnari and most other species represented careful survival, protecting what they had. The humans represented something else entirely, something that might either save the galaxy or destroy themselves in the attempt. The war was about to begin, and Veltar found himself both terrified and fascinated to see what would happen when humanity truly fought for everything they believed in. Veltar watched from the bridge of the human command ship as Admiral Song's carefully planned attack fell apart within minutes of engagement. The Kethmori had anticipated every human strategy, countered every tactical maneuver, and overwhelmed their positions with brutal efficiency. On the tactical display, red symbols representing human ships blinked out one by one. The Velnari support ships, positioned in defensive formations, fared no better. 3 were destroyed in the opening salvos before they could even return fire. Admiral, we have lost 60% of the 3rd Fleet, reported Communications Officer Kim Woo-bin, his voice tight with controlled emotion. 4th Fleet is requesting permission to withdraw. Negative on withdrawal, Admiral Song replied calmly. All ships continue the attack. Veltar could not understand this decision. The battle was clearly lost. Continuing to fight would only result in more deaths with no strategic benefit. Every military doctrine he knew demanded retreat when facing such overwhelming odds. Then something happened that changed everything. Lieutenant Colonel Kim Woo-bin, the communications officer's brother who commanded one of the damaged ships, made a decision that defied all logical combat doctrine. Instead of retreating when his ship's weapons failed, he rammed his vessel into the side of a Kethmori capital ship and led a boarding party into the enemy vessel. Veltar watched through the tactical sensors as 37 humans fought their way through, Corridors filled with hostile aliens, the Kethmori were larger and stronger than humans, with natural weapons and armor that should have made close combat impossible. But humans, Veltar realized, did not fight the way other species fought. Where most beings would try to overpower their opponents through superior strength or technology, humans adapted constantly. When their energy weapons proved ineffective against Kethmori armor, they switched to projectile weapons. When projectiles failed, they used explosives. When explosives ran out, they improvised weapons from whatever materials they could find. Lieutenant Colonel Kim and his team fought for 3 hours inside that enemy ship. They destroyed critical systems, gathered intelligence data, and transmitted valuable information back to the human fleet before their position was finally overrun. None of them survived, but their sacrifice provided something that changed the entire battle. Admiral, called Dr. O. Yunbi from the science station. We have detailed scans of Kethmori internal systems. Lieutenant Colonel Kim's team transmitted everything before they died. The information revealed weaknesses that human engineers immediately began to exploit. Within an hour, every human ship had modified their weapons to target newly discovered vulnerable points in Kethmori armor. The tide of battle began to shift, but it was not just the tactical information that impressed Veltar. It was how the humans reacted to their comrades' sacrifice. Instead of being demoralized by the loss, they became more determined. Instead of calculating whether such losses were acceptable, they focused on making sure those deaths accomplished something meaningful. Pilot Shin Yena demonstrated this human characteristic perfectly. When her fighter squadron was surrounded by enemy ships, she did not try to escape or call for rescue. Instead, she led her remaining pilots in a coordinated attack that destroyed 2 Kethmori support vessels before her own ship was shot down. Veltar watched her final moments through the combat recordings. As her fighter spiraled toward destruction, she transmitted targeting data for the larger human ships, giving them clear shots at previously hidden enemy positions. Her last words, recorded by the ship's communication system, were instructions to her wingman about enemy movement patterns. This pattern repeated throughout the battle. Human after human made decisions that prioritized mission success over personal survival. Engineer Jung Dong-hyun stayed at his damaged post to maintain power systems, allowing his ship to continue fighting even as fires consumed his engineering section. Commander Han So-young held a defensive position for 47 minutes against overwhelming odds, buying time for civilian transports to escape from a nearby colony. Each sacrifice revealed something about human nature that no other species seemed to possess. They fought not just to win battles, but to protect something larger than themselves. They valued the survival of their communities more than their individual existence. The most remarkable moment came when Captain Lee Sang-ho's ship was crippled by enemy fire. Standard procedure would have been to evacuate the crew to other vessels and abandon the damaged ship. Instead, Captain Lee ordered his engineers to overload the ship's power core and use the resulting explosion to damage nearby enemy vessels. "Sir, that will destroy the ship," his engineering officer pointed out. "The ship is already lost," Captain Lee replied, "but we can make sure it takes some of them with us." The explosion took out 3 Kethmori ships and severely damaged 2 others. Captain Lee and 43 crew members died in the blast, but their sacrifice created an opening that allowed the rest of the human fleet to penetrate the enemy formation. What disturbed Veltar most was that none of these decisions seemed to be the result of desperation or panic. The humans made these choices calmly, as if sacrificing themselves to help others was the most natural thing in the galaxy. Major Park Hae-young exemplified this when ground forces were needed to defend a critical supply depot. The Kethmori had landed troops on the planet's surface and were advancing toward installations that supplied the entire human fleet. Park led her battalion in a fighting retreat that lasted 18 hours. They fell back from position to position, making the enemy pay for every meter of ground. When ammunition ran low, they used improvised explosives. When explosives were exhausted, they fought with whatever weapons they could scavenge from fallen enemies. The final stand took place at the depot itself. Park's force had been reduced to 60 soldiers facing over 300 Kethmori ground troops. Logic suggested immediate surrender to preserve the lives of her remaining people. Instead, Park ordered the depot's fusion reactors overloaded. The resulting explosion vaporized the entire facility along with all the Kethmori forces in the area. It also killed every human defender, including Park herself. But the explosion prevented the enemy from capturing fuel and supplies they desperately needed. Without those resources, the Kethmori fleet was forced to withdraw from the system 3 days later. Veltar found himself deeply troubled by what he was witnessing. These humans displayed a level of self-sacrifice that bordered on species-wide insanity. They threw away their lives for abstract concepts like duty, honor, and protection of others. Yet their apparent madness was proving effective against an enemy that had never encountered meaningful resistance. The battle ended with both sides claiming victory. The Kethmori had destroyed more human ships and killed more human soldiers. By any objective measure, they had won the engagement. But they had also been forced to retreat from human space for the first time in their expansion across the galaxy. They had lost ships and soldiers they could not easily replace. Most importantly, they had encountered something they did not understand and could not counter with pure force. Admiral Song addressed his surviving commanders after the battle. His fleet had been reduced by 70%, exactly as the pre-battle projections had predicted. Thousands of humans were dead and many more were wounded. Today we learned that the Kethmori can be beaten, Admiral Song said. The price was high, but now we know how to fight them effectively. We will rebuild, rearm, and prepare for the next engagement. Veltar expected to see despair or doubt among the human officers. They had suffered catastrophic losses for what amounted to a minor tactical victory. Instead, he saw determination and planning for future battles. They were already analyzing what had worked, what had failed, and how they could do better next time. That night, as Veltar prepared his report for the Velnari Confederation, he struggled to find words for what he had observed. How could he explain that humans fought differently than any other species in the galaxy? How could he describe their willingness to sacrifice everything for principles that most beings would abandon when survival was threatened? Most troubling of all, how could he admit that their approach might actually be superior to the careful, logical methods used by every other civilization he knew? The war was far from over, and Veltar was beginning to suspect that its outcome would determine not just the fate of human and Velnari space, but the future direction of galactic civilization itself. 6 months after the first major battle, Veltar barely recognized the war that was unfolding across the galaxy. What had begun as a simple conquest by the Kethmori swarm had transformed into something unprecedented in galactic history. The humans were winning, not through superior technology or overwhelming numbers, but through something that defied every military principle Veltar understood. They were winning because they refused to accept defeat, no matter how impossible victory appeared. Veltar observed the latest battle from the bridge of Captain Lee Sang-ho's replacement ship. The new commander, Captain Nam Tae-woong, studied tactical displays showing Kethmori positions around the contested world of New Busan. Enemy has established defensive positions in the northern continent, reported Major Park Hae-young, who had somehow survived her previous battle despite all reports indicating otherwise. 3 divisions entrenched with heavy support weapons. Veltar had learned that human casualty reports were often inaccurate. Humans had a disturbing tendency to survive situations that should have killed them, then return to duty before their medical recovery was complete. What about civilian evacuation? Captain Nam asked. Negative, sir. 2 million people still trapped in the southern cities. Kethmori have blocked all escape routes. This presented the kind of strategic dilemma that typically ended in disaster for defending forces. Any attempt to rescue civilians would require dividing military resources and exposing troops to enemy fire. Military doctrine suggested abandoning the civilians to save the combat forces. Captain Nam made a different choice. Commander Ko Yeon-soo, take fighter squadrons 1 through 6 and establish air superiority over the southern continent. Major Park, prepare ground forces for immediate deployment. We extract every civilian, then we take back the northern positions. Sir, Major Park said carefully, that plan requires us to fight on 2 fronts simultaneously while protecting non-combatants. Our forces will be spread too thin to be effective in either operation. Then we make them effective, Captain Nam replied. Find a way. Veltar had heard similar conversations dozens of times during the past months. Human commanders routinely accepted missions that violated basic tactical principles. They divided their forces, fought outnumbered, and attempted rescues that endangered their primary objectives. Somehow, they made it work. Commander Ko demonstrated this human ability to achieve the impossible. Her fighter squadrons were outnumbered 3-1 by Kethmori air defense systems. Standard tactics called for gradual attrition of enemy positions through careful, coordinated strikes. Ko attacked everything at once. Her fighters swept over Kethmori positions in waves, hitting defensive installations faster than the enemy could coordinate responses. When Kethmori interceptors rose to meet them, Ko split her formation into smaller groups that attacked from multiple directions simultaneously. Veltar watched through combat recordings as Ko piloted her damaged fighter through a formation of enemy ships, using her superior maneuverability to force them into defensive positions. Her wingman, pilot Moon Jisoo, covered her approach despite his own fighter being held together by emergency repairs and determination. Target locked, Ko transmitted. Beginning attack run on primary defensive installation. Her fighter dove toward a Kethmori ground position that bristled with anti-aircraft weapons. The enemy concentrated their fire on her ship, creating a pattern of explosions that should have made survival impossible. Ko flew through the barrage as if it were merely an inconvenience. Her missiles struck the enemy installation with perfect accuracy, destroying weapon systems that had been holding human ground forces pinned in defensive positions. The elimination of those weapons allowed Major Park's troops to advance toward the trapped civilians. But Ko's success came at a price. Her fighter had taken multiple hits during the attack run. Systems failures were cascading through her ship, and her engines were losing power rapidly. "Commander, your bird is falling apart," transmitted her wingman. "You need to eject and let us pick you up." "Negative," Ko replied. "Still have weapons and partial maneuvering. Can provide close air support for ground forces." She flew her dying fighter for another 47 minutes, attacking enemy positions and directing other pilots to high-value targets. When her weapons were exhausted and her engines finally failed completely, she used the fighter itself as a weapon. Crashing it into a Kethmori command, Bunker Ko survived the crash and continued, fighting on foot with the ground forces, until the civilians were safely evacuated. This pattern of impossible survival and continued combat effectiveness had become standard among human forces. Sergeant Moon Jisoo fought for 3 days with injuries that should have incapacitated him. Engineer Jung Dong-hyun kept damaged ships operational through modifications that violated manufacturer specifications and safety protocols. Most remarkably, Dr. Seo Min-gyu made a discovery that changed the entire strategic situation. Working with captured Kethmori technology and data transmitted by Lieutenant Colonel Kim's final mission, Dr. Seo identified a critical vulnerability in the enemy's collective consciousness network. The Kethmori hive mind relied on quantum communication links that could be disrupted by precisely modulated energy pulses. "The disruption is temporary," Dr. Seo explained to Admiral Song during their strategy conference. "Maybe 10 to 15 minutes before they re-establish connection. But during that time, individual Kethmori units will be operating without central coordination." "Can we target their entire fleet simultaneously?" Admiral Song asked. "Theoretically, yes, but it would require coordinated attacks from multiple positions, perfect timing, and modifications to every ship in the fleet. Any other species would have considered such a plan too complex and risky to attempt. The coordination required was beyond anything previously attempted in galactic warfare. The margin for error was essentially zero, and failure would likely result in the destruction of the remaining human forces." Admiral Song ordered the plan implemented immediately. What followed was 3 weeks of the most intensive preparation in military history. Human engineers worked around the clock to modify weapon systems for quantum disruption. Communications officers developed synchronization protocols that would coordinate attacks across multiple star systems. Scientists calculated precise timing requirements down to microsecond accuracy. Most importantly, Admiral Song shared all technical specifications with every allied force in the region, including species the humans had never encountered before. This decision shocked Veltar more than anything he had witnessed. Military technology was typically the most closely guarded secret any civilization possessed. Sharing such information with unknown allies was unprecedented and extremely risky. "Why give this technology to strangers?" Veltar asked Dr. Seo during one of their conversations. "Because we need all the help we can get," Dr. Seo replied. If other species can use our discoveries to fight the Kethmori more effectively, everyone benefits. But what if they use the technology against humans after the war? Dr. Seo looked surprised by the question. Then we will develop better technology. Competition makes everyone stronger. Right now, cooperation is more important than competitive advantage. The coordinated attack began at precisely 1347 Galactic Standard Time on a Tuesday. Veltar observed from Admiral Song's command ship as hundreds of vessels from dozens of different species launched simultaneous strikes against Kethmori positions throughout the sector. The quantum disruption worked perfectly. For 14 minutes and 37 seconds, the Kethmori collective consciousness was fragmented. Individual ships and ground units found themselves operating without coordination, unable to communicate with their commanders or coordinate with nearby forces. The Allied fleet struck with devastating effectiveness. Ships that had been invincible when operating as part of the collective suddenly became vulnerable when isolated. Kethmori forces that had never experienced defeat found themselves retreating in confusion. But even in victory, the humans demonstrated characteristics that set them apart from other species. Admiral Choi Jae-wook, commanding the final assault on the Kethmori capital ship, broadcast surrender terms even as his forces overwhelmed enemy positions. When Kethmori commanders attempted to destroy their own ship rather than face capture, human boarding parties risked their lives to prevent the self-destruction and save enemy crew members. Why preserve enemy forces? Veltar asked. Because the war is ending, Admiral Choi replied. These Kethmori will need to find a new way to exist in the galaxy. They cannot do that if they are all dead. The battle ended with complete victory for the Allied forces. The Kethmori fleet was destroyed or captured. Their expansion was halted and their remaining forces were scattered across the galaxy. Most species would have celebrated and returned to their previous concerns. The threat was eliminated and life could return to normal. The humans began planning reconstruction efforts for devastated Kethmori worlds. They were our enemies, Veltar pointed out when he learned of these plans. They were, Admiral Song agreed. But the war is over. Now they are refugees who need help rebuilding their civilization. We cannot leave entire populations to starve simply because their leaders made bad decisions. This response revealed something about human nature that, 1 year after the end of the Kethmori War, Veltar found himself in the most unlikely place imaginable, a former Kethmori world, watching human construction crews work alongside their former enemies to rebuild a devastated city. The transformation was remarkable. What had once been a barren landscape of consumed resources and industrial wasteland was slowly becoming something that resembled a living world again. Trees grew where extraction facilities had once stood. Clean water flowed through channels that had previously carried toxic industrial waste. Captain Nam Tae-woong, now promoted to admiral, walked with Veltar through the reconstruction site. Human engineers worked side by side with Kethmori technicians, sharing knowledge and techniques that neither species could have developed alone. The integration process is proceeding better than expected, Admiral Nam reported. Former Kethmori collectives are adapting to individual decision-making. Faster than our psychologists predicted, Veltar observed a work crew installing atmospheric processors that would restore breathable air to the planet. The team consisted of 3 humans, 2 Kethmori, 1 Velnari, and 2 members of species that Veltar did not recognize. They communicated through translation devices, but their cooperation seemed natural and efficient. How do you make this work? Veltar asked. These beings were trying to kill each other less than a year ago. Admiral Nam paused to watch a Kethmori engineer explain atmospheric processing techniques to a human technician. We focus on what needs to be done rather than what happened before. Everyone here wants the same thing, a world where their families can live safely. That shared goal makes cooperation possible. Dr. An Ji-young approached them carrying a tablet displaying planetary restoration data. Her work on environmental recovery systems had become legendary throughout the galaxy. Worlds that had been considered permanently dead were being brought back to life through techniques she developed. Admiral, the atmospheric composition has improved by 12% this month, Dr. An reported. At this rate, the planet will support unassisted human breathing within 2 years. What about Kethmori respiratory requirements? Admiral Nam asked. Already compatible. Their biology is actually helping the process. They metabolize some atmospheric compounds that are toxic to humans, creating a natural symbiosis. Veltar found this cooperation between former enemies almost impossible to believe. In his experience, wars ended with winners and losers, conquerors and conquered. The idea that enemies could become partners seemed to violate fundamental laws of galactic politics, yet everywhere he looked, he saw evidence that humans had somehow made the impossible into reality. The reconstruction site was only one example. Throughout human space, former Kethmori populations were being integrated into multi-species communities. They contributed their advanced industrial technology, while learning human approaches to individual creativity and initiative. More remarkably, the cooperation was spreading beyond human territory. Velnari worlds were establishing trade relationships with former enemies. Species that had hidden from the Kethmori were now working with them on mutual projects. The war had not just ended with military victory. It had created something entirely new in galactic civilization. Observer Veltar called Dr. Kim Sora from across the construction site. Could you review these cultural integration protocols? We want to make sure they respect Velnari customs. Veltar examined the documents she provided. They outlined procedures for establishing mixed communities, where multiple species could live and work together, while maintaining their distinct cultural identities. The protocols were more detailed and considerate than anything in official galactic law. These are very thorough, Veltar observed. But why ask for my approval? Humans could implement these policies without consulting other species. Dr. Kim looked surprised by his question. Because they affect your people too. We cannot create successful communities without input from everyone who will be part of them. Your perspective helps us understand problems we might not see ourselves. This approach to governance was another human characteristic that defied Veltar's understanding. Most species made decisions based on their own interests and imposed those decisions on others through superior force or political influence. Humans seem to prefer making decisions through consensus, even when they possess the power to act unilaterally. Captain Cho Minho demonstrated this during a planning meeting for the next phase of reconstruction. Representatives from 7 different species sat around a conference table, debating resource allocation and development priorities. The Kethmori delegation suggests concentrating industrial development in the northern continent, Captain Cho said. The Velnari team prefers distributed facilities to minimize environmental impact. How do we resolve this difference? Instead of making an executive decision or putting the matter to a vote, Captain Cho facilitated a discussion that continued for 3 hours. Each delegation explained their reasoning, identified their primary concerns, and suggested possible compromises. The final solution incorporated elements from both proposals, while adding innovations that no single species had considered. Industrial facilities would be distributed but connected through an underground transportation network that minimized surface disruption. The decision satisfied everyone while creating a more effective plan than either original proposal. This consensus building takes much longer than traditional decision-making, Veltar pointed out to Captain Cho after the meeting. True, Captain Cho agreed. But the decisions are better because they incorporate more perspectives, and everyone supports the final plan because they helped create it. Implementation is actually faster when everyone agrees on the goals. Veltar was beginning to understand that human approaches to problem-solving were fundamentally different from other species. Where most civilizations optimized for efficiency or control, humans optimized for inclusion and cooperation. This difference became most apparent when he observed their approach to former Kethmori. Leadership. The Kethmori hive mind had been controlled by a central consciousness called the Prime Directive. This entity had made all strategic decisions for the entire species, treating individual Kethmori as expendable resources in service of collective goals most galactic species would have executed. The Prime Directive as a war criminal, responsible for countless deaths and the destruction of entire worlds. The humans were attempting rehabilitation. Dr. Yoon Taekyung led a team of psychologists and cognitive specialists working to help the Prime Directive develop individual consciousness while maintaining beneficial aspects of collective coordination. The process is unprecedented, Dr. Yoon explained to Veltar during one of their conversations. We are essentially teaching a collective mind how to become multiple individual minds while retaining the ability to work together voluntarily. Why attempt this at all? Veltar asked. The simplest solution would be to eliminate the Prime Directive and let individual Kethmori develop independence naturally, because the Prime Directive possesses thousands of years of accumulated knowledge and experience. That information could benefit everyone if it can be shared voluntarily, rather than imposed through control. The rehabilitation was proceeding slowly, but showing promise. The Prime Directive was learning to offer suggestions rather than commands, to request cooperation rather than demand obedience. Individual Kethmori were developing personal initiative while maintaining beneficial collective coordination for complex tasks. Most remarkably, other species were volunteering to participate in similar programs to improve their own societies. Veltar's own people had established exchange programs with human communities to learn their consensus-building techniques. The results were transforming Velnari society in ways that had seemed impossible just years before. I need to ask you something, Veltar said to Admiral Nam during one of their walks through the reconstruction site. Why do humans help others even when there is no benefit to yourselves? Why share your advantages freely? Why risk your lives for people you have never met? Admiral Nam was quiet for several minutes before answering. Because the universe is very large and very dangerous. Intelligent life is rare and precious. Every species that survives makes the galaxy a little safer and more interesting for everyone. But surely humans benefit more by maintaining advantages over other species. Short-term, perhaps, but long-term we are all stronger when we work together. A galaxy full of prosperous, creative civilizations creates opportunities that no single species could achieve alone. This philosophy was evident everywhere Veltar looked. Human space stations welcomed visitors from dozens of species. Human research facilities shared discoveries immediately with anyone interested in learning. Human colonies offered assistance to any group that requested help. The transformation was spreading. Species that had spent millennia in isolation were establishing contact with neighbors. Trade networks were expanding rapidly as civilizations shared resources and knowledge. Conflicts that had persisted for generations were being resolved through human-style mediation. The galaxy was becoming something new, a true community rather than a collection of competing civilizations. As Veltar prepared his final report to the Velnari Confederation, he struggled to summarize everything he had learned. How could he explain that humans had not just won a war but transformed the fundamental nature of galactic civilization? His conclusion was simple but revolutionary. Humans did not fight to conquer or dominate. They fought to protect and include. They did not seek advantage over others but worked to create advantages for everyone. The universe, Veltar realized, had been waiting for a species that measured success not by what they could take, but by what they could give. Not by how much they could control, but by how much they could liberate. Humans were not just another galactic civilization. They were the species that could unite all others in something greater than the sum of their parts. The final scene of Veltar's observation period took place at a ceremony celebrating the first anniversary of the reconstruction project. Representatives from 43 different species gathered to commemorate their cooperation and plan future projects. Children from multiple species played together in areas that had been battlefields just 1 year before. Scientists from former enemy civilizations collaborated on research that would benefit everyone. Artists created works that incorporated aesthetic traditions from across the galaxy. Veltar submitted his request to the Velnari Confederation that day, permanent assignment to human space, not as an observer, but as a participant in the new galactic community they were creating. The universe had found its destiny in a species that fought not for themselves, but for the right of all intelligent life to flourish together among the stars.